Hey, well, thank you, room full of people, for braving the heat. Welcome, everyone. Before I start, I have a request of you. So I want you to think about the bad managers you've had in your life. Don't say anything just yet. We'll get to it later. I want you to think about the bad managers you've had in your life, and then also think about the good managers in your life. Psychologists call this priming, just priming the audience for. So we'll get to that in a bit. So when Joe asked me to give this talk, I said I don't really have like cool coding stuff because I don't do cool coding. I just go to meetings. But I could talk about what it's like to go from being an engineer to being a manager. And much to my surprise, Joe didn't think it would be the most boring talk ever. But I wasn't sure what to title this, so I started with something that I intended to be kind of self-deprecating and to make fun of managers. And this was also my other option, but I was afraid it would be too much of a deep cut and you'd have to be too much of a BoJack fan to get the reference. And since this is a JavaScript meetup, I figured I would go with a JavaScript theme because we're required by law and the JavaScript gods to talk about JavaScript frameworks. So I'm officially presenting my new JavaScript framework, the Management JS, the JavaScript framework that pretends to know what you're talking about. There will be no actual JavaScript in this presentation. But there will be many jokes about managers. So what we're going to talk about are why might you want to be a manager in the first place? What does a manager actually do? What are the challenges of transitioning from being an engineer to being a manager? And when you become a manager, how should you do it? So look, we all know that software is like a glamorous job where every day you wake up in your like bed made of $100 bills and saunter over to your laptop and write the next Chat GPT or Bitcoin or Ask Jeeves or Alta Vista. Blast from the blast from the past. Why would you ever give that life up, right? And of course, I'm kidding. We all know that it really looks like hours and hours of this. Although I would say that part of the reason this person is having pain is because they're using a regex to do a string replace of a class name directly in the DOM. Like, I don't know what the hell they're doing there, but you're gonna have a bad time when you do that. I think we can all identify with this person's pain, though. Um, I think one of the one of the main pain points of being a software engineer is something I call the software engineering loop, which is that software can initially be fun and creative and you solve problems, but eventually throughout your career, you sort of get into this kind of loop of like, oh, that's exciting. I want to take that on. And then you take it on. And then a couple days in, you're like, oh, this is harder than I expected. And so it starts to get really challenging. And then things aren't working and you're just raging at your laptop. And then finally you get it working and you're like, this is amazing. I love this. And then 30 seconds later, you realize you missed something or you found a bug. And so you spend the next couple of days trying to solve the bug. Maybe it's because I was a bad engineer. I don't know. Um, and that's, yes, maybe it's just not a good engineer. And so you sort of, and then you solve the bug and then you ship to production and everything's great. And then you start a new sprint and the thing just repeats. And you sort of start to feel like uh, you you are caught in this loop that you can't get out of. I actually have a theory that that's part of the reason why we see people jump from company to company so much more in tech than other places. Because like Agile puts you in a loop where every 2 weeks or every week or every 3 weeks or whatever your interval is. Um, and after a while, you just sort of need to break the loop. You need to get out of it. So you go to a new company. It's, I don't know, one of my pet theories. The other thing is that there's lots and lots of like nerd fights in being an engineer, right? In some ways, it actually gets worse as you become more senior engineer because I don't know, you've learned more, you've gotten used to things. Um, it gets tiresome to constantly be fighting in PRs about like this refactoring, or, function versus const. Function, by the way. Function, by the way. Thank you, Ernesto. I actually thought that was a troll of Joe, because I think you're a big fan. You're a big fan of arrow functions, right? Yeah. So that was directly put in there to be a troll of Joe Mantello. But thank you. But thank you, Ernesto. Hoisting for the win. that, that is pretty funny, actually. And I think one of the good things I was talking, as we were talking before this talk, management can sort of get you into the sort of room where it happens, gets you closer to the business. And I think there can also be a sense after a while of being an IC, it can be the sense of like you want to have more influence over the decisions that happen, over the things that happen. Although, massive spoiler alert, you don't actually have any control over everything. It's just another group of people telling you what to do. Instead of one person, your manager telling you what to do, the scope widens. Um, in my particular case, I actually really loved being an engineer. I loved the creative aspect. I loved strategizing with teammates. I loved like start of a sprint, like, okay, you'll work on that, I'll work on this, maybe we can pair on this. I loved that. I also like being of service. I like, helping out designers, helping out product, helping out my manager, doing all that stuff. But as I was letting on earlier, that I ended up kind of getting burned out by the engineering loop, and I just sort of got to a point where some of the things I really loved and that I really wanted to do, like being of service, strategizing with teammates, it turned out I could do that as a manager. Um, and so that was kind of part of why I went from really enjoying a career in engineering to being a manager. Um, so we've talked about why you might want to be a manager, but what do managers actually do all day? Um, so for me and most managers I know, our day tends to look like a lot of team meetings, ceremonies, some of which I may run. I run retro. Sometimes I might have to run planning. I might run stand up. Um, there seems to be a push in the industry to like not have as many project managers. That seems to be a more recent thing, and a lot of that burden goes on to the managers, which isn't great because like there's some things I'm good at, like running, project management is not. I don't want to be doing Gantt charts all day. Um, I might have mission-wide meetings. A lot of it, though, is like one-on-ones, doing coaching, spending time looking for growth opportunities and things for people on the team. Also cross-functional. I'll talk a little bit about that later. Really getting to know my design partners, my product partner especially, and then also mentorship. I still have a couple of people I mentor every week for engineering. I have somebody I mentor on being a manager. Um, so those are sort of more day to day. And then planning, I might do a lot of planning with the other leads, with product leads, with my manager. Pretty much anything that comes up throughout the day that my team needs. That's one of the biggest things, and I think that's one of the most important factors for being an effective manager. Is if someone needs something, you got to jump on it right away. And if you say you're going to do it, you do it. Because if you tell them you're going to do it and you forget, you know, people are not going to believe that you're going to get things done. Um, and so, what is a manager ultimately responsible for? And what I really like is the way Russ Laraway puts it. Russ Laraway, really well-known manager. He was at Google. He was at I think he's still at Qualtrics. He was at Candor Inc. He started out in his management career actually as a Marine. Um, and the way he puts it is really managers are responsible for two things. One, you deliver an aligned result. And two, you ensure the individual success of your team members. And that aligned result is sort of like we were talking about before I started this, about like what matters really is that you deliver results. But an aligned result really is about making sure that everyone, your engineers, all of your product partners, your design partners, everybody's really clear on like, this is what we need to get done. Right. So I was talking earlier about like you start a sprint, what are our goals? What do we need to get done? Making sure everybody is super clear on what it is we need to get done in at the end of our sprint, at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, and being really, really clear. And you do this by talking in one-on-ones about how people are doing and sort of reiterating like this is what we need to get done. Meeting with cross-functional partners, maybe other stakeholders, maybe my manager, maybe external teams. I'm currently on a team that provides tooling for other teams. So a lot of what I do now is meeting with some of these external teams to like kind of manage the relationship, make sure I know what they need, make sure that we're kind of staying on top of that. And I'd say the most important relationship to me as an engineering manager is my product partner. So your product director, your product manager, that is how they are your link to the business. When I was saying earlier about like, it's really about delivering things of business value. The way you're going to know that is by talking to your product manager and really knowing what's important to them and being able to really zone in with your team. Okay, this is like what's really important here. And then also within that, you sort of also have to manage like, technical debt and some of those things, and like really working with your product partner to prioritize and phase. Like there are going to be times when we can work on technical debt. There are going to be times when we can't work on technical debt, and like finding the ways to sort of work that into the roadmap. The other thing, so I said with Laraway's definition, it's like aligned results, but also ensuring the individual success of your team. And really that is about one-on-ones, coaching, mentoring, career growth opportunities. Like recently, I spent a lot of time over the last 2 to 3 weeks of just finding some work that was like really, really well adapted to some people who maybe the stuff we were doing wasn't really adapted to their skill set. And I'll get to a little bit of that later. Um, so in other words, like you're responsible for results and taking care of your people is kind of how I'd put it. So what are the challenges of moving from engineering to management? The first thing, especially early on, uh, I remember my first 2 weeks of being a manager. I'd get to the end of the day and I was exhausted. And I was like, what did I do all day? I'd get to the end of the day and I'd feel like I didn't do anything and I'm completely wiped out. Because you're in meetings and you're talking to people and it's not like, oh, I didn't fight with my laptop all day, or I didn't like, you know, implement a design pattern, or like, write something that was kind of interesting. I'd get to the end of the day and be like, that was weird. I didn't feel like I did anything. And there's a very different definition of like work and productive from being an engineer to being a manager. And there's just something sort of more satisfying about shipping code. It's like very final. And in some ways, as a manager, unless you like get somebody promoted and like that happens, there's not always a finality. There's a lot of things sort of in the hopper and not as much the finality what you're doing to what you're doing. And it really takes some time to get used to that. It took me a good couple of months to get comfortable with it, beyond the sort of every Monday morning existential threat of like, what am I doing with my life? Um, Other challenges, I would say managing really picks at your insecurities. Leading a team, leading a group of people is always really vulnerable. And you're dealing with it from both ends. So you're you've got a team that you have to support and get work done, and you want them to largely be happy with how things are going. You have a manager that you also have to satisfy, so you're sort of getting it from both ends. And that can be challenging. um, Other challenges, it can be hard to let go. You spend sometimes decades building expertise, building knowledge, being used to being in PRs all day and like doing code reviews. And sometimes as a manager, you just don't have time. And it also depends on the role too, because like some companies, the manager is like a glorified lead engineer. It's like we want you to do all the things you were doing as an engineer, but we also want you to manage people. Um, that's not ideal. At the times we tend to have managers who aren't really into the code. And in some ways, I don't like to be into the code because it's my way of just saying, "Hey, I trust you. I'm not going to be looking over your shoulder. I'll find out if there's something we need to talk about, but that's your domain." Um, I was talking earlier about being in the know, being in the room where it happens, but sometimes that's bad. because it can be stressful to know things that are going to affect people's lives. I've been through reorgs, I've been through, we were talking about RTO before, like sometimes difficult news that people are not going to like. And I remember I got news of a reorg and then I had to go on vacation and it was like a little bit stressed because I'm like, a lot of people are going to be upset about that. So that whole being in the know thing, it can be good and it can be bad. One of the other things that I think is a real challenge that maybe you don't think about initially is being a manager is this sort of weird position where it really is your job to believe in people, right? If you're going to coach people, if you're going to help them with their career, you have to believe that they're capable of more. And you walk into a room of people, and there's going to be people you connect with. There are going to be people you don't connect with as much. There might be people you really don't like. And one of the things you have to do, because you're just always going to have different levels of connection with people, you may have people you really connect with and you really like them as people, or you just think they're really awesome, and you can't play favorites. You have to try to find equal opportunities for people. You can't give one person more opportunities than other people. You have to really try to be objective. And the end of the year, often you have to judge their performance, and you have to sort of take your personal feelings out of it because you're a manager, but you're also a person, and you're generally gonna have some of that stuff happen. Um, Managers surprisingly are still people. You don't throw away your humanity card when you become a manager. So which skills carry over most from uh, being an engineer to a manager? The biggest thing I would say is problem solving and specifically debugging. Um, you know, when you're a manager, you're solving problems all day. They're just very different kinds of problems than technical problems. And I always said as an engineer, like, I could only solve problems in as much as I had enough and high quality information, right? Uh, I'm sure you've all had situations where, and I know I did this too, where you're like, something happens. Oh, I think I know what that is. Let me jump in and solve that. And then you get into the problem. You're like, oh, damn it. It isn't what I thought. And if I had just like held off on making a judgment and gotten more information, I maybe would have done a better job of like finding that bug and fixing it or whatever. And so it really is about gathering information. The difference is that as a manager, your way of doing it isn't through like looking through logs, looking through stack traces, those sorts of things. It's talking to people and really just like digging into the problems, finding out what this person thinks and what this person thinks, and like really sort of putting together the patchwork of what the problem looks like. Um, and it can be really tempting to sort of just jump in and try to figure out what the problem is right away based on limited information. Um, so I would say that's probably the thing that most has translated from my career to engineering, from engineering to managing. Okay, so I teased this at the beginning. I want to talk about bad bosses. So I gave you that prompt at the beginning. Give me some things that you think that describe bad managers you've had. No feedback? Okay, interesting. That's a good one. Arbitrary deadlines. Okay. Hmm. Hmm.
Things that can happen. So I've always thought good managers like found a way to kind of and keep that like a bit of a Chinese wall between you and people who don't understand what your team is doing or filtering it out or something like that. Like, so the shield, a little bit of protection to keep some of that pressure off of the team.
Right, and the corollary
Totally.
is the thing that you were just mentioning where, there's gonna be a reorg, or we're gonna cancel the product, or, the thing we've been working on for the last year, that was a dumb idea, we're gonna just take this whole project and go in a whole different direction. All those, you've got a filter on, and maybe let them seep through in a controlled manner.
Totally.
Or the boss is like, oh, that's, you ever seen, delete all that, Joe's fired, Fred's fired, Susie's now running this new thing, go.
Yeah,
Oh, thanks, boss.
not being a buffer between what's above you and the team and all of the effects that has. Not listening. Hmm. That's a good one too, Joe. So yeah, not being flexible, not listening to the team because they have some sort of ideology based on whatever. It's also like sometimes like The Office, I think of like, I just learned this thing at I learned this thing from a book. Or I learned this thing from a conference. We're going to do this now. And all of a sudden you're implementing this without really talking to your team, getting a feel for what might actually work. Anything else? It's always fun to talk about bad managers. Hmm. Yeah, getting too cutesy with. Um, yeah, I'm surprised nobody said micromanage. I'm surprised nobody said micromanage. I haven't had too many micromanagers. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Some tool.
Yeah, if I see a manager writing code, I'd be very concerned.
Totally. Yeah. Others that I know of, managers taking credit for your work. Um, that's another one. I always think if you feel like you have to do something like this with when your manager comes around, you've probably got a bad manager. Like, why is she vacuuming in the desert? Like, yeah, oh, no, I'm busy. I'm actually doing work. But you're not actually doing it. Yeah, exactly. Flip it around. Flip it around. What about great managers you've had? What would you say would describe great managers you've had? I mean, I'll throw some out there like they take the blame, but they give you the credit. Um, they're honest about feedback. Yeah. If you're Steve Schwartz, they give you the feedback you want. But that, I mean, that is part of knowing people too, right? Like knowing how to give, tailoring the feedback to the person, right? I think is a really good call. Joe, what were you gonna say? Hmm. Yeah. Hmm.
You know, you know, continually doing the same thing, some sort of problem or whatever that could be improved on. Like I look for that, and I would say a bad manager is afraid to give that kind of criticism, and it's usually because they don't know how, or they
Yeah.
don't have the confidence to trust their engineers, and that would be my big one for me. It's a bad manager doesn't trust his engineers, but that's honestly a bad just anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good call because it is tricky, right? Nobody wakes up in the morning wanting to tell someone they suck, right? Maybe Joe Matalone does. definitely a lot of people no manager I know does. People on Twitter do because like they're anon accounts or yeah, or unemployed, yeah. But I think that speaks to your point, like about not giving feedback, like in the same way, Joe, like, hey, if I'm not doing something, tell me, like, let me know so I can do a better job. I think is totally fair. Um, yeah, exactly. Exactly. You don't want to in an end of year review, you don't want to hear you should have been doing something,
Yeah.
right? It's like, well, why didn't we talk about it if I should have been doing something, right? That's, you know, I totally hear that. I think to Steve's point too, like, I think great managers take the time to learn about you, so they'll know, like, hey, Joe likes getting corrective feedback. He doesn't need pats on the back because he knows what he's doing. Steve might want positive feedback, right? It's great, and even to this sort of point, I think maybe you were making, Joe, earlier, or somebody was making earlier. It's not about like a one size fits all approach, right? Really, great managers manage to the person, not to like whatever they think everybody should be doing. And so you can only do that by getting to know people. Hmm. Building consensus, yeah.
Just kind of thrashing,
Hmm.
because there isn't enough weight behind versus the kind of manager like the round robin stuff.
Hmm.
Literally, Monday you're right, Tuesday you're right.
Oh, wow. Round, round. You just arbitrarily correct on that day. And be decisive. Yeah. Yeah. One leadership person I like says it's about commitment, not consensus, right? You get enough information so that everybody can commit to it, but you're never going to have a situation where everybody agrees. One other way I heard, one other thing I think is really important for great managers. Stephen Covey says, lead people, but manage things. And some managers think they're about managing people and leading things. I always say, like, I don't want to manage anyone. Like, you're a professional. Like, I want to lead you somewhere, and we'll manage the things, but I'm not here to manage you. Um, thanks, y'all. One of the things when I was looking to get into management, I was thinking a lot about, well, what in sports do, or who in sports are the best managers? And I think it's really important because sports is so tactile, right? It's like somebody's really good at catching a ball or they're not, right? And it's really obvious. Or someone's really good at throwing, like shooting a ball into a basket. Like those are really concrete tactile skills that are a little bit different than like sometimes software engineering is a little bit harder to judge. Um, and so when I looked at the best managers, the these are really like three of the very best managers. So Bill Belichick, Nick Saban, Antonio Conte. It's too bad Mark's not here because he would been the only one I would have gotten the soccer reference. Um, but these three men, the thing that really stands out when you look at the way they manage teams, they managed to take. There's this old cliche in sports, like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That everybody coming together is better than just adding up the individual skills of everybody. And what they really do is put people in a position to succeed. They find out what their strengths are and they get them to where their strengths are. They find out what their weaknesses are and they don't put them in a position unless they really want to work on their weaknesses. They don't put them in a position where their weaknesses get exposed. Because partly because you may not want to be in a position to do things you're not good at, but also you're usually good at the things you like and you get in this sort of virtuous cycle with the things you like. The one exception is this famous play in Super Bowl 52 where Tom Brady they ran a trick play and Tom Brady went out for a pass and Tom Brady famously dropped the pass, right? That's not because Tom Brady is a bad football player, right? Tom Brady inarguably, and I say this as someone who hated the Patriots throughout almost all of their Super Bowl run, Tom Brady, inarguably the greatest quarterback of all time, very possibly the greatest football player of all time. He didn't drop the ball because Tom Brady sucks at football. He dropped the ball because Tom Brady's not strong at catching the football. But if you need someone to win you a Super Bowl or throw touchdowns, you want Tom Brady. And so I just think even with Bill Belichick, who was, also inarguably one of, if not the greatest football coaches of all time, even the best make a mistake. But generally, those three men have made a career out of putting their people in the best position. Nick Saban, if you don't know, is current coach of Alabama. He's won 6 national championships. I think 5 or 6 at Alabama. He won 1 at LSU before then. Just all 3 of these men. And Antonio Conte, one of the greatest soccer managers of the last 20 years. Also, one of his nicknames is the Tailor, because he would come into a team and tailor his tactics to what the team was really strong at, and proven to be really great at it. Looking at the best managers I had in my career, that's Tom Brady dropping a ball again. The 2 best managers I had in my career. So as I was getting ready to be a manager, I thought I should really look at the people who positively influenced me and who I thought, man, that person was a great manager, and really learn from what they did. The 2 I had was my great boss and mentor, Salman Gandhi, Salman was a unicorn. He was one of the smartest people I've ever met. He was probably the best programmer I've ever met, but also one of the best managers I've ever seen. Salman, I remember one day he came in, he's like, yeah, I don't know, last night I was bored, so I wrote a keylogger in C#. And we're like, who does that? Like, just a really, really shocking combination of brilliance, like intellectual brilliance and emotional intelligence. But really what I learned from Salman was the power of working for someone who like truly genuinely cared about you as a person. And then the other person is my friend, and not that I expect you to know who these people are. It's in some ways maybe my career call out to these people for being great managers. My friend Alan Tingley, who managed me at Wirecutter, who really showed me the power of someone who truly listens, someone who like really genuinely just non-judgmentally listens to you, and huge impact on me. The real common theme in all of these things for me is trust. My belief is that trust is the inherent currency of leadership. If trust came up earlier, right? If people don't trust you, they'll never follow you where you want to lead them. And all the things we talked about, I think, inspire trust. When you give people autonomy, the message is, I trust you. When your manager shares information with you, the message is, I trust you. When they ask your opinion about like building consensus, right? Hey team, what should we do? I trust you. I'm not coming in to tell you what we're going to do. I want to know where you want to go, what we should do. I'm trusting you. And one of my favorite sayings is this guy, David Burkus, who's an organizational psychologist, who says trust is paradoxical. It's something in life where you actually have to usually give it before you can receive it. I think about that a lot as a manager. And when I start managing a new person, the thing I really try to do is just say, hey, give them as much trust as possible, which is antithetical to how typically we've thought about management, where people are like, oh, I'm not going to trust you, right? We were talking about micromanaging before. The message that sends is, I don't trust you, so I'm gonna like look at every single thing you're doing. And much of the things when we talked about bad managers, they're about not inspiring trust. And so what's the best way to inspire trust? It's care. If you do nothing else as a manager but show people you care, you will be effective as a manager. There's a book I'm going to reference in a bit here, by this guy who's a Navy captain, and I actually cribbed that line from him. There are lots of things that inspire trust. There's like technical competence. There's lots of things you can show people that they can trust you. But ultimately, if you show people that you care about them, even if you're not that technically competent, they will at least trust that you're going to, not screw them over, that you're going to do things that are right by them. Also, in that same book, Captain Broker described a DoD study during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, where they found that soldiers who had leaders who they rated positively had like a 7% incidence of PTSD, but in the units where they just did not describe their leaders positively, they had a 45% incidence of PTSD. So like a 6.5-fold difference in PTSD because they worked for poor leaders. And I think about that actually a lot as like the power of being a good manager. And actually in that same book, he was talking to a friend of his who had been in combat and had come back and was in a civilian job and had a micromanager. And he said to this guy, compared to what it was like when you were literally being bombed every day, uh, how would you rate that experience on like a scale of 1 to 10? He was like, it's probably like a 7 or 8 in terms of like distress. And I'm assuming that's because as a soldier, you probably get used to it. He said, how would you describe your distress with this micromanager? He's like, it's an 11. And like, how crazy is that? That having a micromanager can be more stressful than facing potential death. Exactly. People don't quit companies; they quit bad managers. Here's another example. I'm actually making fun of the fact that I'm quoting myself. I'm actually quoting myself. If you show people you care about them, they will forgive you for your mistakes and you will make them. But if they ever perceive you don't care about them, almost nothing else you do matters. Um, Funnily enough, I said this in a meeting one time, and a manager who used to be my manager and I left, they publicly disagreed with me about this statement, and then they ended up getting fired 6 months later. So I was reading one day this in The Athletic from Ben Chilwell, who unfortunately Mark is not here. This was going to be another chance for me to take a shot at Mark. But Ben Chilwell is a fullback for Chelsea, my football team. And Chelsea just got this new manager, Mauricio Pochettino. And Pochettino is known for being like really great at kind of learning about his players, establishing a personal relationship. And it just really stuck with me, some of these quotes from Ben Chilwell. This was like, I don't know, maybe a month after Pochettino came in, and he said things like, he and his staff take a lot of time personally. They talk to us not even about football things, but like family life, what you enjoy doing away from football, your favorite TV series, what book you're reading. They take a lot of time to get to know you personally, which then makes you feel more comfortable with them. But after only 2 or 3 weeks, it's pretty rare to feel like you want to run through a wall for someone. And it's just about getting to know people. Um, And some people will say like, "Oh, this is like really touchy-feely, and that's really nice, but we got to. This is business. We got to get work done." And to them, I would say, "Are the Marines touchy-feely? Russ Laraway was a Marine. Is the Navy touchy-feely? Both of these people who are huge influences, amazing books. I would recommend them if you are a manager or want to be a manager. You know, are they touchy-feely?" Or even just the military generally. And look, if we're just all sitting around singing Kumbaya and not getting work done, right? That's not gonna work, right? We're not gonna be doing that very long because we're getting paid to actually get results. And and my point here is that like caring about people actually is the best way to get those results. And so ultimately, I think really what the best managers do is they create cultures. This term is really in vogue these days, but psychologically safe cultures, which really just means that everybody feels like they can speak up, and even that they feel safe to disagree. If you've ever been on a team with a total know-it-all or someone who was like always had to be right and created this situation where there wasn't room for debate, that's that's not a psychologically safe culture. So sometimes that phrase can sound a little bit like we all have to get along. Not necessarily. It's that we can get along. We can disagree, sometimes vehemently disagree, but at the end of the day, we're good. And so let's talk about culture. Stephen Covey says teams and organization cultures are a direct reflection of the culture of the leader. And I think it's really important to say that culture is not about how you feel. Culture is what you do. I once heard a leader say, like, oh, like culture is like how you feel showing up at work. And it's like, no, culture is not about what you say. It's not about how you feel. It is about how you feel because what you do will eventually influence how people feel. But it's about what you do. And one of the mistakes a lot of leaders make is they think it's about saying certain things, but or saying the magic words, right? But a lot of times there can be a disconnect between what the leader is saying and what the culture actually is. So, like some people will say, "Oh, well, we care about work-life balance," but the only people who get promoted are the people who work 12 hours a day. That to me, that's worse than not even saying you care about work-life balance because the problem is that's a lie. And so that's not your culture. Your culture is a culture of overwork. And so ultimately, it's really the behaviors of the leader that create the culture because it's behaviors that matter. And I have been referencing this book. I do believe this is the best book on leadership I've read, um, and also on being a manager. And the sort of core of the book is Captain Broker talks about really six main behaviors that you need to have to be a great leader. You got to know your people. You got to be visible. You got to treat your people with dignity and respect. You can't ignore kind of a little bit when we were talking about this sort of interesting dynamic with Steve wanting to hear positive feedback and Joe like just tell me what I'm doing wrong. Don't ignore poor performance, but don't ignore good performance either, right? You got to do both. Um, be optimistic, but not overly optimistic, and continuously learn how to be a better leader. And so much of what I said about like trust and care comes from this book. Um, some final thoughts on what it takes to be a successful leader. Do what you say you will do. Um, I mean, I think this is just generally true in life. Be reliable. I think if you can be a reliable, dependable person, people will trust you and you're going to have a much better life. The people I know who are flakes generally don't have very good times in life. Um, and the other thing I think I was just referencing previously in that previous slide is be positive. It's hard to be a negative leader. It's, being negative can be fun from time to time, but over a long enough time, it's really hard to lead. It's hard to follow someone who's only taking you in a negative direction. At a certain point, it's like, okay, I want to go somewhere and have it be a positive vision and do something cool. So, in summary, should you be a manager? If you like pain, then definitely. I often like to say, as a manager, you don't get paid for the work, you get paid for the pain. Um, I'm joking. It can actually be a really, really rewarding job. You can help people with career growth. You can be there for people, sometimes in really difficult situations. People will tell you things going on in their life sometimes that you can really, maybe they don't have a lot of people in their life to talk to, or they're just going through a hard time and you can be there for them. And it's really an honor and kind of a privilege to be able to do that for people. Um, and the world needs great managers. There are not enough great managers in the world. There are some, but we need more of them. Um, and and I think the other thing is, um, I think the thing to be aware of is just that the skill set is different. So when you're going from being an engineer to being a manager, you're going to have different challenges. You're going to wonder what you do all day. And you also, I had a director who said to me, they were bragging to me one day about their knowledge about load balancers. And I was like, that's kind of weird because like you're not in the load balancer business anymore. You're in the people business. And so just as a manager, when you go from engineer to manager, you're still in tech. you still need to know generally what's going on. You may need to jump into PRs. You may need to help people with technical decisions, but ultimately you're in the people business. Thanks, y'all. Any questions? Totally.
Get that trust. And it's not. This is why I hate my review. I asked the question in the interview, like, how do you deal with somebody who is super defensive of their PR when there's a problem? And my answer is always the same. Logic way. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe you're wrong. Let's out and follow down the path of, is there a style guide? Do we have, this thing to look at? And then I know in my last interview for this job, they were like, okay, what if that doesn't work? And I said, well, then you have a hiring problem. It's not my problem. But as a manager, I'm like, wait, like, do you ever get to that point? Like, what if it's a shit team? And you can't, you go like, oh, Jesus, I can't trust you. It helps me to stand me in the back. Jobs and meetings.
Well, you can't keep giving trust forever, right? That's the paradoxical nature of it, right? I give it to you, but if over a long enough timeline you prove to me I can't trust you, well then we start having discussions about, hey, like Joe keeps coming to you in good faith to have conversations about stuff in PRs, and you're never willing to work with him. Like, we need to talk about, like, one of the things I think I love Russ Laraway says is, like, you need to be really clear as a manager about your expectations. So it is about, like, I trust you, but here are my expectations of what you should be doing. For me, one of my expectations is you be a good teammate. That means you help out your teammates, you pair with them. You know, there are going to be disagreements. There should be disagreements, right? If we're not disagreeing on a team, there's probably a problem too. But if someone is like always resistant, and that's going to create a problem on a team, right? Because after a while, you're going to be like, it's not worth it for me to like even engage this person because they're never going to listen. At that point, it becomes a performance issue, and like, we need to start, as a manager, it's my job to start looking for ways I can help that person. And the other thing is, if I do get to know them well, if they do trust me, they might accept influence from me in a way that I might be able to help them. But it's possible. I've seen it where I don't think micromanaging would still be good though, because you'd still be sending a message that of like lack of trust, right? But you would have to, like, what would happen, Joe, is I'd probably check in with you from time to time, be like, hey, I've been talking to X about this. Are you seeing anything? I might talk to other people on the team. Hey, are you seeing things about this? Not in that they should be ratting each other out, but that like I was talking about the debugging thing, like I can only get the information from the people I talk to. And like, I should be taking temperature and be like, give me your on, and hopefully if you trust me, if I've built the relationship that you trust me, you'd be like, I don't know, I'm not seeing it yet. Right? Hopefully you tell me that if you're not. Or if you are, be like, yeah, you know what, like, I can see he's working on it. It's not there yet, but like he's working on it. And then I can continue to have the conversation with someone. That being said, there are times where you just hit a roadblock, and like that person be like, no, I like the way I do things, and I don't like what Joe wants me to do. So I'm going to do it my way. And it's like, okay, well, maybe we need to find you another team. Maybe, you have to start going down. The Captain Broker in that book has this saying. He had someone who he had this happen with, where it was like he tried working this guy, it just didn't work. And someone said, and he was having a hard time with it because like it kind of sucks as a manager to do that. And then his friend was like, Mark, um, there's a place on the bus for everybody, but sometimes they're just on the wrong bus. And your job is to, if this isn't the right bus for them, find them the right bus. And, you know, if it does eventually come down to like, yeah, exactly. Maybe the right bus isn't being a programmer, right? Maybe it's not being an engineer. Maybe it's like, you know, hey, like be an accountant or something. I don't know. Hmm. The great point. Hmm.
It was, no, but the correct engineering approach is to do this. I'm sorry, but we're not, I'm sorry, we aren't ready to do the correct approach by your definition. So we have to do it this other way. Like, no. And it really came, he finally had to be let go because
Yeah.
he was like, to him, there was only one way. And the culture was, we may be striving to that, but we can't go make that jump now. We
Right.
have to be willing to step to it. And he just is like, no, okay.
And in some ways, I mean, if someone's not a good cultural fit, it's not good for them to be around too. Cause like ultimately, you don't want,
Wasn't happy.
yeah, exactly. He probably wasn't happy. And the sooner you look, you don't ever want to fire. I haven't had to fire anyone yet, to be totally clear. I'm not, I'm not looking forward to it. I hope I never have to do it. But it is true that the sooner you get them out of a culture that is they're going to make unhappy and they're unhappy with, maybe the sooner you get them to somewhere that is better for them. There are teams that might want somebody with that attitude, but you know, this might not be the one. So, but it, you know, if you build enough trust with folks, then hopefully your team can tell you. Because the problem in that situation is if you haven't built trust with your team and they're not telling you those things, then like those things can fester, especially because as a manager, you are pulled in 10 different ways every day. There's this fire that's happening. There's this person that's pinging you about stuff. Your manager's bringing you something. There's like, you know, HR is pinging you about like some training or something, or, you know, there's lots of stuff going on. Um, and so that's where you have to have trust. People will tell you what's going on.
Skip level manager, so not my direct manager, but he's reported pretty much right into the CEO. He was the high level engineering manager. And he got all the leads together in a meeting and says, well, we've looked at the work we need to do, and basically it's looking like, you know, 60-hour weeks for the full team for the next year. And
Oh my God.
because we've hardly ever dealt with this guy. You've never talked to this guy.
Mm.
Just kind of coming down, so there's no trust.
Yeah, exactly.
He comes down and says, you guys the whole team's 60 people have to die in a ditch for a year. And I said, it's just not gonna happen. And it was so not the thing he was expecting to hear. But I'm happy to speak truth to power. So I'm like, because all they can do is fire me. I can get another job.
Yeah.
I don't care. But this guy, he was just stunned that the leaders of the engineering team were just like, no, there's another answer. There's got to be another answer than you will do. But
Right.
but I've also worked with managers where like, you have the trust. You're like, well, let's see what we can do.
Totally.
You have trust with the manager. You can do, well, what if we prioritize these? Maybe we only need 9 hours a day instead of 12 hours a day. You know, maybe we can, there's usually a way. But this guy came in just like, you will. And it's like, no.
Yeah.
The answer is no.
I mean, that's very old school, right? Old school was, you know, back in the day, it was about hierarchy and you know, the boss came down and told you what to do. And the problem was people didn't have as many options. And, you know, especially in software, it's like, okay, I'll have a new job in a month. I mean, that's changing a little bit as the economy, yeah, maybe not as much now, but still, you know, you all are very experienced. It's probably not going to take you very long to get another gig. Um, but like you said, somebody's helicoptering in, but whereas if I was your manager and we had like a long established relationship and I come in and say this and be like, Steve, I'm hearing that we may need to do like 60-hour weeks, right? That'd be a very different conversation. Um, even if by the end of it, it's like we talk about it and maybe that is what we have to do. You may have a very different feeling than like, no, dude, we're not gonna do that. But also I think to your point, like there was no inviting you into the conversation, right? Like that, not only was this someone you didn't trust, but they operated in a way that didn't bring an air of trust of like, hey, here's the situation. Because I always say like transparency is an act of care. Like here's the situation. Here's where what we're running into. Here's what I see. It looks like if we don't work 60-hour weeks for the next year, this is where we're going to run into. What else could we do? Or what am I missing? Right. And that's like bring you in to the conversation. That's a very different conversation than yeah, exactly. Totally. Oh wow.
It's fine. And if you need to take a nap under your desk, it's okay.
Wow. It wasn't Elon Musk, was it?
No, but it was the C, in this case it was the CTO, first time.
Oh yeah.
And it kind of got, friend of a friend of a friend,
Mm,
ended up in this position of power with no experience. And, you know, you don't know why those were priorities. No one knew why they were priorities, but everybody had to die in a ditch. And I feel like it could have gone so much better.
yeah.
And it did, and it worked for some people for about a quarter.
I mean, I could see the crazy thing about this, I could see like, hey, we're hitting a deadline. I've said this to my people, like there may be times where we just have to like hunker down and get stuff done, but it should only be for like a week or two or like a defined set of time. And then once that's done, I'm gonna find ways to let you just like chill for a bit. But like 60 hours a week for a year, that's like that's yeah, that's not gonna make it. Joe, you're already thinking at the C level. Just skip the EM and just go straight to the C-suite with that. Yeah, thanks, y'all. Thanks. Thanks, Nils. I'll let you know if I'm hiring.